Why do Greenseers sit on thrones beneath Weirwoods? Why do the Starks recreate this idea beneath their heart tree? And why do so many Greenseer characters show a symbolism suggesting them as having been turned to stone? Hi, I'm Eldrick Stoneskin, and if you enjoy theories and analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. The idea of a Greenseer is a fascinating and unique magical ability, one that is said to be very rare within George's universe, being a magical gift of the gods which seems to be genetically present and manifests itself in the children of the forest and in House Stark as well. With our main Greenseer, Bran Stark, having travelled north to have this magical gift awakened by the children of the forest, and the last Greenseer Bloodraven in a hollow hill of the children beneath an ancient weirwood. And it seems as though once this magical gift has been awakened through what is suggested to be cannibalism, Greenseers are then sat on a throne beneath the earth fashioned from weirwood roots, so they could be taught to access the knowledge and memories of the weirwood by slipping their skins into the tree itself, essentially skin changing the tree and using this eternal being as a conduit to send their spirit through time, allowing the Greenseer to witness and potentially influence the past, the present, and perhaps even the future. And in addition to this, it seems another function of the Weirwood throne is to extend the life of the Greenseer as well, allowing them to avoid death and live beyond their natural lifespan. Something we already see occurring with Bloodraven, a Greenseer in a cave beneath a Weirwood, seated on a throne made from the roots of the Weirwood above, which we hear from Leaf is allowing him to live beyond his mortal span. And so knowing that Greenseers sit on thrones beneath Weirwoods to use their green-seeing gift and extend their life beyond their natural means, while also knowing the Starks have the genetic bloodline that allows them to be Greenseers, it's very interesting that their founder, Bran the Builder, a possible Greenseer who is also said to have sought out the children of the forest like our current Bran Stark, decided to build an enormous stone structure beneath an existing weirwood, where he and his ancestors would sit on thrones beneath the earth, making it almost seem as if Bran the Builder was a green-seeing Stark who converted an existing hollow hill of the children of the forest into a weirwood cave suitable for human habitation, a place for himself and his descendants to sit on thrones beneath their heart tree and extend their lifespan using the weirwood roots, which could be why we hear tales of Bran the Builder being a king who lived for hundreds of years, possibly extending his life using a throne of weirwood roots from within his newly constructed crypts, and could also be why we're presented with a line of Greenseer kings in the Stone Kings of Winter, who are seated on thrones beneath the Winterfell heart tree just as Greenseers do, while being symbolically suggested as still being alive, with descriptions of these kings both moving and watching from their thrones along the walls repeatedly throughout the series. And to further suggest this is the case, it seems George wants us to be thinking of the Kings of Winter and the Winterfell crypts, while we're being introduced to the idea of Greenseers extending their lives using weirwood thrones while inside Bloodraven's cave, with Bran noting while he explores the cave as Hodor that he finds chambers full of children of the forest seated on weirwood thrones, Greenseers who seem to be dead but are in fact alive, and using the roots of the weirwood to preserve and extend their life, with these undead Greenseers being described as having eyes which seem to follow the light while seated on their thrones, sounding remarkably like the Stark Kings of Winter, seated on their thrones beneath a weirwood, who are constantly described as having eyes which seem to follow the living as they pass as well. In fact, we even see the enthroned Bloodraven directly compared to the Stone Kings of Winter, when Bran remarks that Bloodraven looked like some ghastly statue, once again leading us to connect a Greenseer extending his life on a weirwood throne to the Stone Kings of Winter, who are constantly described as living statues, suggesting to me that perhaps deep in the crypts behind the collapsed wall, we might have the first green-seeing Kings of Winter, still seated on their weirwood thrones, extending their lives for thousands of years using the heart tree above, just like we see Bloodraven and the children of the forest doing north of the wall, which could be why we see so much foreshadowing of the Stone Kings of Winter as still being alive while seated on their thrones beneath their heart tree. But while investigating the idea of Greenseers extending their life through the weirwood throne, it seems that the sacrifice one must make for this preservation is that the weirwood roots need to join with the body, which is something we witness with Bloodraven and the enthroned singers in this cave north of the wall, with all of them having weirwood roots going both around and through them, seemingly consuming these beings while also keeping them alive, effectively extending their life by assimilating with the tree. An idea which is further suggested through the magical weirwood gate that we see at the bottom of the well at the Nightfoot, known as the Black Gate, a gate which is presented to us as a giant moving weirwood face. And if we know enthroned singers like Bloodraven are slowly assimilated by the weirwood, perhaps this giant human face might have once been a Greenseer, seated on a weirwood throne many years in the past, one that has now been so assimilated by the weirwood roots that he has become a part of the tree itself. In fact, this idea is even suggested by Bran when he mentions that the Black Gate looked like a man who had lived for 1,000 years and never died, which is exactly what I'm proposing this ancient Greenseer did, having sat on his weirwood throne while using the heart tree above to potentially live for eternity, all the while eventually becoming completely one with the tree. And as much as living for extended periods of time might be impressive and godlike, it seems the Greenseer has to sacrifice their body by tying it to the weirwood throne to do so, just as we've seen with Bloodraven, the children of the forest in Bloodraven's cave, and potentially the body of the man who became the Black Gate, with all of them being assimilated into the weirwood. But interestingly, if we take a closer look at the literal or symbolic Greenseer characters throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, as we are about to do, we don't find many suggestions of them being consumed by the roots. We actually find foreshadowing of Greenseers sitting on weirwood thrones who have been turned to stone, so they can become living statues on their thrones beneath the earth, preserving the body for eternity while stopping the assimilation with the weirwood roots, allowing them not to be tied to the tree and potentially rise again literally harder and stronger as a living statue. Just like we see suggested with the Stone Kings of Winter who are presented as living statues while seated on their thrones, and just as we see symbolically suggested through the description of Bloodraven looking like some ghastly statue while seated on his throne. And it's something we also see suggested through Beric Dondarrion as well. A character George has presented to us as a symbolic Greenseer by the fact Arya finds Beric underneath an ancient weirwood grove, being sat, almost lost in a tangle of weirwood roots, suggesting Beric Dondarrion as a symbolic Greenseer seated on a weirwood throne in a hollow hill beneath the earth. And by no coincidence, this symbolic Greenseer is remarkably referred to by Arya while in this weirwood cave as standing so still he might have been carved of stone, giving us yet another suggestion of a stone Greenseer with the gift of extended life seated on a weirwood throne in a cave beneath a weirwood. Another example we're given of stone Greenseers is through the ancient northern culture of Skagos, a race of people who, just like the children of the forest and the Starks, appear to be worshippers of the old gods, with the mention that they still offer sacrifices to their weirwoods. And amazingly, this race of old god worshipping northerners are said to partake in cannibalism, while also being said to reside underground, possibly suggesting these weirwood worshippers as Greenseers, with their use of a practice that is theorised to awaken the gifts of Greenseers in cannibalism, and their living beneath the earth just as Greenseers do. And by no coincidence, this culture of subterranean old god worshipping possible Greenseers have named themselves the Stoneborn, symbolically suggesting these possible Greenseers as stone men, while also suggesting a possible stone resurrection or stone birth around the origin of this culture that reside beneath Weirwoods, leading me to believe that the Stone Kings of Winter, the ghastly statue Bloodraven, the carved of stone Beric, the old god worshipping Stoneborn, and several other legends we're about to discuss, such as the Grey King, the Shrouded Lord, and the Titan of Braavos, are meant to foreshadow the idea that the first Stark Kings of Winter were ancient Greenseers who are still alive beneath the earth, having been turned to stone while using the Weirwood throne to extend their lives and allow them to be reborn from stone thousands of years in the future. And remarkably, we see the idea of an ancient Stark progenitor having undergone a stone transformation through the symbolism surrounding this house of Greenseers, who, as we are about to see, are very strongly suggested as having been stone people themselves, with our first example being Sansa Stark, who is symbolically turning to stone when she becomes Elaine Stone, with Sansa repeatedly telling herself that she must become Elaine Stone inside and out. An idea furthered by the fact that after Ned had been arrested for treason in a Game of Thrones, Sansa thinks to herself on 2 separate occasions that the people of King's Landing avoided her as if she had the Grey Plague, symbolically suggesting this Stark as having a disease that turns people to stone. We then have Catelyn Stark, who undergoes a symbolic stone transformation when she's resurrected as Lady Stoneheart. We even have Arya, whose often repeated mantra contains a line of staying still as stone. We also have Rickon Stark, who is thought to be dead but is set to return, with the Stoneborn. We then have Bran Stark, an actual Greenseer who we find out had a statue made of him by Maester Luwin, which was then thrown from a tower, replicating the act that awoke his green-seeing powers with the statue. And finally, we have Jon Snow, who is set to be resurrected near a disease which is foreshadowed to awaken that he may contract that literally turns people to stone, giving us symbolic suggestions of nearly every Stark undergoing a stone transformation. Something which is further strengthened when we take a look at the Stark bloodline and their renowned genetic characteristics, as it seems we find even more stone symbolism surrounding their lineage to suggest their ancestors may have been turned to stone in the ancient past. The first thing to note is that Theon thinks to himself that Arya had her father's eyes, the grey eyes of the Starks, telling us that grey eyes are a known and strong genetic feature of the Starks. And interestingly, Catelyn recalls Ned as having the same Stark eyes, which she then describes as being as hard as stone, giving us stone symbolism in the genetic traits of the Starks. And in addition to these grey stone eyes, Theon thinks to himself after the abuse that he suffered at the hands of Ramsay that his flesh had an old man's greyish undertone, a Stark at last, he thought, suggesting that the known and common genetic traits of the Starks is to have grey stone eyes and grey skin as well, almost as if they themselves are stone people. In fact, this stone symbolism in the Stark bloodline is furthered by the fact that Ned's mother's mother is a flint, with flint being a type of stone and their sigil being that of a stone hand. And we find another suggestion of stone in the bloodline of the Starks with the story of Bael the Bard, a king beyond the wall who supposedly slipped his genetics into the bloodline of House Stark while disguised as Sigaric of Skagos, giving us the suggestion of stone-born blood in the line of House Stark as well. So as you can see, this house of Greenseers known as the Starks have copious amounts of symbolism suggesting them as actual stone people, while at the same time showing us the Stark Kings of Winter as stone Greenseers who are suggested as still being alive beneath their heart tree, suggesting to me that the first Kings of Winter may have been blessed with stone so they could become immortal Greenseers by preserving the body as a living statue while seated on their weirwood thrones beneath the earth, becoming stone to stop the assimilation with the tree and potentially allowing them to be resurrected harder and stronger after their grey transformation, something we see furthered through another ancient character which is heavily suggested as a stone Greenseer, the Grey King, an ancient hero of the Ironborn culture who, if we look closely, shows us some very interesting parallels with the Starks and the Grey Kings of the Winterfell crypts. Parallels that I think George has included to either suggest the Grey King as a proto-Stark and one of the first Kings of Winter, or perhaps to just symbolically suggest what happened to the first Stark Greenseer, with the first parallel we find being the fact that the Grey King is remembered as having grey skin and grey eyes, sounding exactly like the Starks who, as we just discussed, are well known for the genetic trait of having grey skin and grey eyes as well. In fact, the person who thinks his skin is turning grey and therefore becoming a Stark is Theon Greyjoy, who happens to be a descendant of the Grey King. And we also hear that the Grey King had a beard which was as grey as a winter's sea, associating this Grey King with winter and bringing to mind the Grey Kings of Winter we find beneath Winterfell. Another interesting parallel we find between this Ironborn hero and the Starks is that the Grey King was said to have taken a mermaid to wife, which is something we find once again paralleled through one of our King of Winter characters Ned Stark, with his marriage to Catelyn Tully, whose Tully sigil makes her a symbolic fish woman or mermaid as well. In fact, the Grey King was said to have married his mermaid wife so his sons and daughters might live above the waves or beneath them as they chose. And if we think of the realm within the Weirwoods being referred to as a green sea, as we've discussed in previous videos, and therefore the ability to go beneath the waves as the gift of going into the green sea of the Weirwoods, this gets even more interesting, as one of the children of the Grey Man Ned Stark and his mermaid wife Catelyn Tully can in fact do just this, with Bran being born as a Greenseer, being able to go beneath the green sea of the Weirwoods or above it as he chooses as well. We also hear that the Grey King's Hall was warmed by the living fire of the sea dragon Naga, which sounds very reminiscent of the Starks yet again, whose Hall of Winterfell is said to be warmed by dragon fire as well, with heated water running through its walls to warm the castle, which is said to be warmed by dragon's fire, sounding exactly like the Grey King's heated halls. And it's this water running through Winterfell's walls that also mean when the Starks die, they go beneath the surface to sit a throne beneath their watery halls, once again sounding remarkably like the Grey King, who is said to have descended beneath the surface to sit a throne in the watery halls of the drowned god. And we also find George using this water being pumped through Winterfell's walls to paint the castle as a giant anthropomorphized being when comparing this water to blood running through a man's body, giving us yet another parallel with the Grey King's Hall, which is presented to us as a giant anthropomorphized being as well. We also hear that the Grey King was said to have taunted the storm god until he lashed down with a thunderbolt, setting a tree ablaze. Which is interesting, as the Winterfell Heart Tree is described as a blaze of flame, and the very castle of Winterfell itself is presented to us as a monstrous stone tree, which by no coincidence has also been hit by lightning, giving us yet another parallel between the Starks and the Grey King, while also suggesting the idea that the Grey King was associated with, and perhaps even worshipped, the Weirwoods, something we see furthered through the Grey King's association with a demon tree named Yig, a tree which is said to have pale wood and to have feasted on human flesh, a tree that is very clearly meant to represent a weirwood, being trees who require human sacrifice and are known for their pale wood. It's also suggested the Grey King was associated with weirwoods through the ribs of Naga, which has been theorised in the fandom to be the overturned hull of the boat he was said to have carved from the weirwood remembered as Yig, with these supposed ribs of a sea dragon being symbolically described as the trunks of great pale trees, further suggesting these stone ribs as actually being petrified weirwood. And if the ribs of Naga are in fact weirwood, this would also make the throne of Naga's jaw that the Grey King was said to have sat on a weirwood throne, suggesting the idea that the Grey King was in fact a Greenseer. And we find further evidence for this when we hear that the Grey King had ruled for 1,000 years and 7, giving him extended life, just as we've seen with other green-seeing characters. And just as Greenseers go beneath the surface to sit their throne and join with the old gods, so too did the Grey King, going beneath the surface to sit a throne so he could join with his god as well. But what's really interesting about his descent is that we hear the Grey King only went to sit this throne beneath the surface once his skin had turned as grey as his hair and beard. And what I'm proposing is that this grey transformation was in fact a stone transformation, with his skin being remembered as turning grey while he became a stone man before going to sit on his throne beneath the surface and being remembered as the Grey King, which makes a lot of sense when we look to the Ironborn drowning ritual that has arisen around the Grey King's culture, with the language surrounding this religious resurrection ritual possibly suggesting that this grey transformation was the act of literally being turned to stone and then being resurrected as a stone man. "Let Theon your servant be born again from the sea as you were," Aeron Greyjoy intoned. "Bless him with salt, bless him with stone, bless him with steel. Nephew, do you still know the words?" "What is dead may never die," Theon said, remembering. "What is dead may never die," his uncle echoed, "but rises again, harder and stronger." Yes, it seems as though the culture which developed around this legendary king who underwent a grey transformation before descending beneath the surface to sit a throne developed a resurrection ritual in which the participant is blessed with stone before he rises again, harder and stronger, potentially hinting at the Grey King's grey transformation being the result of this stone blessing. And if we look to the very early Ironborn priests who would have performed this stone blessing and resurrection, we find a rather famous priest named Galon Whitestaff, who is noted as holding a Weirwood staff, once again associating the magic of the Weirwoods and the Greenseers with stone blessings and resurrections. And remarkably, we see this person who has been blessed with stone during this ritual revived with a kiss of life. Something we've seen is very much possible through the carved of stone Greenseer character Beric Dondarrion, who was brought back to life with a kiss, and Catelyn Stark, who was revived as a symbolically stone person in Lady Stoneheart after her kiss of life as well, giving us two symbolically stone people literally resurrected from a kiss of life in the main series, just as we've seen suggested in the Ironborn drowning ritual, in which people are blessed with stone and then given the kiss of life, so they can rise again harder and stronger, perhaps literally, as a stone man. All in all, I think the culture and story of the Grey King and the many parallels it shares with the Starks and Winterfell is meant to inform us about the Grey Kings we see foreshadowed to rise again from beneath the watery halls of Winterfell, using his myth to inform us that there was indeed a king who ruled for 1,000 years, whose very skin turned grey, a king who was blessed with stone and descended beneath the surface and possibly rose again harder and stronger as a living statue. Something we see further suggested through the legend of the Shrouded Lord, a mythical figure in A Song of Ice and Fire who is said to have been a statue that came to life. A figure we also find referred to as his Grey Grace, a description that reminds us once again of the Starks, who are known to have grey skin and grey eyes, and the Grey King with his grey skin and grey eyes as well. And the reason this lord is referred to as his Grey Grace is because he was a literal stone man, further suggesting the possibility of the Starks and the Grey King as having been stone men as well, just as his Grey Grace the Shrouded Lord was. Another parallel we find between the Starks and the Shrouded Lord is that his Grey Grace will grant a boon to any man who can make him laugh, depicting the Shrouded Lord as being humorless and therefore will grant a reward if he can be made to laugh, which is interesting as it's well known the Starks are said to be humorless as well, with Robert even telling Ned in the crypts around onlooking stone statues that he could teach Ned how to laugh, depicting Ned as the Shrouded Lord amongst the symbolically living statues of the crypts of Winterfell. And it seems this boon the Shrouded Lord will grant if he can be made to laugh is to bestow his grey kiss on that person, which happens to be giving the recipient grayscale and turning them into a stone man, a boon which is said to be something he does not bestow lightly, which sounds a lot like the idea of blessing someone with stone, something we've seen in the resurrection ritual of the Ironborn, a ritual I'm suggesting was in fact the process of turning people to stone as well. And to further this idea, when it's said the Shrouded Lord bestows his grey kiss on someone, he's choosing that person, who will become a statue from grayscale, to ornament his stony court, presenting him as a stone man with a group of men he has turned to stone to take part in his court, reminding us of the stony court of the Kings of Winter on their thrones beneath Winterfell, and the Grey King's warriors who would have been blessed with stone and are seated on thrones in a court as well. And to further these connections, it seems the Shrouded Lord, who was suggested as a stone man, was brought back to life with a kiss, only further reminding us of the Ironborn drowning ritual that surrounds the Grey King's culture once again, in which the participant is blessed with stone before being resurrected harder and stronger with a kiss of life as well, giving us two examples of stone people being resurrected through a kiss of life. And finally, we also hear it suggested that his Grey Grace lived for 1,000 years, once again sounding very similar to what we hear about the Grey King, who was blessed with stone and is said to have ruled for 1,007 years, suggesting his Grey Grace, the Shrouded Lord, as another stone Greenseer who lived an extended life, just as we've seen suggested through the statues of the Greenseeing Kings of Winter seated on their thrones beneath a weirwood foreshadowed to wake, a Greenseer extending his life on a weirwood throne, suggested as looking like a ghastly statue, a symbolic Greenseer shown to us as sat on a weirwood throne who has received extended life and is symbolically suggested as being carved of stone. A culture of potential Greenseers who worship the Weirwoods, dwell underground, and named themselves the Stoneborn. A king who was a likely Greenseer is said to have been blessed with stone, whose skin turned grey, ruled for 1,000 years, and went beneath the surface to sit a throne, and a stone man who is suggested as having been a statue who came to life, bestowed people with greyscale to sit at his court, and lived for 1,000 years as well. All of which I think are meant to foreshadow the Chekhov statues we see heavily and consistently suggested as still being alive beneath the Winterfell heart tree. A group of grey kings who I think went beneath the surface to become human statues, seated upon weirwood thrones after being blessed with stone, preserving the body for eternity from decay and halting the assimilation with the roots, while the spirit lives on for eternity inside the tree, essentially allowing them to become eternal, a gift that would be perceived as becoming a god as you rose again, harder and stronger. And it's this that I propose the first Stark Kings did that are behind the collapsed wall at the bottom of the crypts, hence all the foreshadowing of the statues of the Kings of Winter waking from their thrones. And if we look to the legend of the last hero, an ancient figure who was most likely a proto-Stark, and could well be one of the first Kings of Winter at the bottom of the crypts, it seems he travelled north around the time of the Long Night and gained an unknown magic from the Children of the Forest. And what I'm proposing is that this unknown magic the last hero gained from the children was this stone transformation and the awakening of his green-seeing powers. And it seems this might just be the case when we look to the magic surrounding the old gods and the Greenseers, who, as we're about to discuss, seem to be very closely associated with stone magic. With the first suggestion of this being the fact that the Weirwoods the children worship and the Greenseers utilise never die, they just turn to stone. In fact, the old gods that the children of the forest worship are said to be gods of forest, stream, and stone as well, giving us stone trees and stone gods as a central aspect of the religion of the children of the forest. We even hear a suggestion that the children possibly possessed stone magic when we hear Catelyn tell us during the story of Durin Godsgrief and the construction of Storm's End that the children helped him build it, shaping the stones with magic, potentially hinting at some type of stone-based magic or power. We even hear it suggested by Leaf while speaking with Bran that the spirit of a skin changer can pass into stone and reside in stone as well, just as it can pass into and reside in the Weirwoods, which possibly explains why we find stone columns with faces beneath an ancient weirwood grove in the Rainwood through Ariane's Winds of Winter chapter, with the fact these stone idols have faces suggesting to me the possibility that these stone columns contain the spirits of Greenseers who have gone into the stone, giving the stone columns faces so the Greenseers within can see out, while also reminding us of all the stone Greenseers beneath Weirwoods we've seen so far. We also find this association between the Weirwoods and stone magic furthered through the culture of Skagos, an ancient race of people who worship the Weirwoods and have named themselves the Stoneborn. And we've also seen this connection furthered through an ancient priest with a Weirwood staff, who would have been blessing people with stone before resurrecting them. And so after seeing that the children of the forest worship trees that turn to stone, follow gods of stone, potentially have magic that can shape stone, can skin change into stone, worship idols of stone beneath the earth, are worshipped by a culture who name themselves the Stoneborn, and are associated with a priest who blessed people with stone, it seems very possible that the children of the forest and the magic of the Weirwoods could have given the last hero, a person who was most likely a Stark, a stone blessing and transformation, allowing this Stark hero to be impervious to the cold of the others and protected from being torn apart by the Whites, all by using the nature-based magic of the children and being turned to stone so he could literally rise again harder and stronger and take back what the armies of men had lost. And we find some rather compelling evidence that this was indeed the case through the final living statue we need to discuss in A Song of Ice and Fire, that being the Titan of Braavos. a giant stone man who is said to come to life in defense of his people, who is meant to symbolically represent the last hero through his wielding of a broken sword, giving us some very strong evidence to suggest that the magic the last hero gained from the children of the forest was indeed the ability to become a stone man. It's even further suggested this living statue is meant to represent the last hero through Arya's sample chapter in the Winds of Winter, where we find an example of the Titan of Braavos being referred to as the Last Titan, a name very reminiscent of the last hero. And we find more evidence that the Titan of Braavos is meant to represent this ancient Stark hero when we hear the ship Arya sees the Titan from while arriving in Braavos named as the Titan's daughter, clearly implying Arya as a direct descendant of the Titan of Braavos, further suggesting this living statue as representing a Stark last hero who became a stone man. And rather amazingly, we see another Stark girl presented as a symbolic Titan's daughter as well, when Sansa becomes Elaine Stone, posing as the supposed daughter of Littlefinger, whose family sigil was originally that of the Titan of Braavos, cleverly implying this Stark girl as a daughter of the Titan as well. And it just so happens this living statue is noted as having green hair and green armour, implying this stone man as a green man or Greenseer, giving us yet another stone Greenseer in the series, and furthering the idea that the last hero was in fact a Stark Greenseer who was turned to stone so he could rise again harder and stronger. And finally, we even hear Arya think that the Titan of Braavos could step right over the walls of Winterfell while observing this symbolically living statue, suggesting the image of a living statue rising from beneath Winterfell and stepping right over the walls as he wakes, furthering our theory that George is using the Titan of Braavos to suggest the idea of the last hero having been a Stark Greenseer who was turned to stone, and waits beneath Winterfell as a living statue to rise again in defence of his people when faced with the threat of the others and the Long Night, rising again harder and stronger from their Weirwood thrones, ready to face the onslaught of the others. If you'd like to hear more about this theory, click the link on the screen now for my full breakdown of the evidence. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this theory in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.